Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Birkenshaw, and I'm going to be doing a 40-minute presentation on supporting trans, non-binary young people and some strategies that then sit around that. Now, at the moment, I'm not using a microphone, so I just want to make sure that can people hear me okay at the back. It's just because I think I get distracted by the microphone. And also, I don't know if you ever speak with a microphone and you can hear your voice being amplified, it sounds really, really, really strange. And I must admit, that does have an impact on me. So what I would prefer to do, I prefer to then stand here, so I'm not actually in the way of the slides. Okay, so I'll probably stand here, and I know what that may mean. That may mean that you are looking at the slides, and then obviously then looking at me. So I don't want you to get neck ache. So I really do apologise about that. Right, first of all, I brought some handkerchiefs with me. And the reason for this is, as I then talk about, there are a number of different things really that I'm hoping then to pull together. And so by the end of the session, I do want you to really have an understanding of the trans perspective of the world. And some of the emotions that I feel, this is completely authentic. And I still get overwhelmed with those emotions. And I get overwhelmed for, I think, two reasons. One is because it's a suppression of feelings that I've always had, but ever since I can really remember. And that still comes out. So if I suddenly then pause, that may be because I'm feeling quite overwhelmed. The second reason is because I take estrogen.
I do too.
This is always a difficult word to pronounce, endocrinologist. I then have the hormones of a woman aged around about 30. But I am going through, in essence, a second puberty. So I've no intention of actually slamming the door. I've no intention of then stomping around or anything like that and saying that life's not fair, not at all. But I just thought I'd make you aware of those particular things. Right, the first thing, as I then talk today, there will be some key moments in which we then reflect on certain things that I am then going to say. Obviously my name's Claire Birkenshaw, and really what we like to do is we put labels onto people, don't we? And so if I was then going to give myself labels, obviously that's my name. I am transgender, I am trans, I am a trans woman, I am a woman. But out of everything, I'm a human being. So really what I want you to think about is what it means to be a human being. Because whilst we might have arguments about whether I really am Claire, whether I am trans or transgender, or whether I am a woman, we can have those big debates. But what you cannot deny is you cannot deny the fact that I'm a human being. And what we have to think about is our values and what it means to be a human being and how we treat other human beings. And that is really the key thing that we have to then reflect upon. So the aims really are to then look at the societal context for trans and non-binary people within our society. And I just want to talk briefly about that. The legal frameworks that then sit around supporting trans and non-binary people, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then some strategies, and these are, from my personal viewpoint, strategies that you can then employ, whether you are working in youth organisations, whether you are working in schools, if you are then working with young people, how you can pull all of these different things then together. And I suppose you could say it's an intersectionality of different ideas, using legal frameworks, using your own knowledge and your own skills, and how then you can operate, which then offers that support. So, as one of the early things that I then did in my transition, I thought it would be a really good idea to email Justin Greening. I don't know why I then did that. I just thought, you know what? You are the Secretary of State for Education. You are also the Minister for Women and Equalities. And I thought that this was something then to celebrate my transition. So I thought I would contact Justin. And Justin actually, and I did this through email, and she emailed me back. And it was a really nice email, and what she then said is about that trans equality is something that really the government needed to be working on. And we're not quite there yet. And one of the things that I suggested to Justin is that if we have ambitions as a society, our ambitions are not just for us now, but they're for our young people. And if we really believe in equality, then we have to do something about it. You know, I'm really proud of living in our nation. And for me, you want to be a world leader. I mean, you know, no disrespect to Germany, no disrespect to France, no disrespect to the United States, and then other countries around the world. I'm very, very proud to live where I then live. But I'm also really proud of our young people. And I have, like all of us will have, is that ambition to make us a truly inclusive and equal society, or give equal opportunity for all, no matter what their identity is. And surely that is our ambition for young people. So when you turn around and say world leader, that's exactly what our ambition should be. That we want to be that world leader, that other nations and other people look to for inspiration. So Justin then wrote back, and I thought, you know what, Justin, that is absolutely fantastic. And one of the key things that made a difference to me is that Justin, in this email, she said she was really proud of me. And that's what I want you to hang on to. Because what Justin then did is he helped to validate my identity with those kind words. And they were inspirational words to me as well. So that made a difference to my well-being. So then if we look at the societal context that exists around transgender people, I think there have been some really significant moments that have then taken place. The first is where MPs, the Transgender Equality Committee, so a group of MPs then started to inquire about what lives were like for trans people. And they interviewed a whole range of people. And it wasn't just trans people talking about their own experiences, as professionals as well. And what they came to recognise is that actually the life of a trans person is filled with numerous challenges. And those numerous challenges may be to do with the medical systems that we have within the country, the long waiting times. I know that for myself, then appointment times, it took just over a year from my GP putting in a referral to the Gender Identity Clinic at Charing Cross. Just took just over a year for that first interview then to take place. And then the next interviews, then 4 months, and then another 4 months, and then my next appointment is in June next year. So there's this ongoing long process that then takes place as I then go through transition. So the Transgender Equality Report then starts to highlight some of the difficulties that trans people face, and included in that is self-harm, and then suicidal thoughts, and then suicidal attempts, which were based on some studies that they then used to inform them. One of the key things is just how difficult it is for young trans people as well. Following on from that report, then there was the transgender equality debate in the Houses of Commons, or the House of Commons, which again was really significant, because what it's then doing is that saying in our democracy, we are debating this, we are then trying to improve the lives of everybody in our country, which I felt was really, really significant. What we're also then seeing in society is there are growing numbers of trans adults that are being referred to gender identity clinics. And there are 8 gender identity clinics around the country. Charing Cross see the vast majority of trans patients. So that's based down in London. And they see approximately 75% of trans people in our country. They currently have, with people that they're working with, 7,500 people. So then another 3,500 people are then split between the other 7 gender identity clinics that exist around the country. One of the key things that we've then got to start thinking about is why? Why is there then growing numbers of people that are identifying as trans and non-binary? And I'll talk about non-binary a little bit later. But also we've even seen a growing number of young people who are questioning their gender identity. So what seems to have happened is that there is this greater awareness. And the awareness isn't just happening in our own country as well. When you look at other countries around the world, they're also seeing a growing number of people that are identifying as trans. So National Geographic and Time magazine, they decided to put that on the front cover of their magazines. And they're saying, well, why is this the case? Are we then moving beyond what we would then see as traditional gender stereotypes? So why? Is there some sort of gender revolution that's then taking place? One of the key things I want you to think about is has it always been there? And it's just that maybe society now is more understanding, more accepting, so people can then say, this is how I really feel. This is really, really me. I mean, I don't know what your viewpoints are, and I'm not sure either. I mean, what I can talk about is how I have then come to make the decision that I'm then making. So what we then see here is that these are the number of referrals that have gone into the Tavistock Clinic. And the Tavistock Clinic work with young people. Approximately 2000, year 2000, so from 1999 to 2000, we then see, 2009 to 2010, there were 97 referrals. So these are young people aged 18 or under referred to the Tavistock Clinic. And you can see in the course of 7-8 years just how many young people have been referred to the Tavistock Clinic for their gender identity. And it's a significant amount of young people. So why? Why is this then happening? And what we have to bear in mind that it isn't probably just a one-off event where parents are going, I think my child is trans, because their child may then have done something which is different from their assigned gender at birth. And so, right, I'm going to take them to the doctors. Or are we then seeing longer stories that are then taking place, where parents are observing their children and saying, you know what, my child is really unhappy. So how then do I get that support then with my child's unhappiness, unease with their gender? And then a referral then goes through. Now in terms of my own transition, it's approximately 2 years ago that I came out. And this was incredibly challenging for all types of different reasons. It was incredibly challenging because I was a head teacher. So I then had to think about, okay, so what would happen next? And I came to the conclusion about my own gender identity that sat inside me was a significant amount of shame about how I felt. And this shame had generated in my childhood. Because actually my gender expression had started in childhood. And there were certain things that happened in childhood where comments that were then said which meant that I had to contain Claire. And I had to put Claire in a box. And what then happened is that became my secret. And this started around about the age of 6. And when you look at the research for a significant amount of trans people, then it starts at actually quite an early age. So it started at the age of 6. Certain things were then said, and then I then contained Claire. And then it became that if I was in a house of my own, Claire then reappeared again. And that's where the shame and the stigma and the guilt then comes in, because you realise that you think that you're doing something wrong, and then you worry about what other people are then going to say, and you worry that you are then going to disappoint people, you are then going to let them down. And this was something that I'd wrestled with ever since I can then remember through my teenage years. And being a teenager was really, really, really difficult because you go through puberty. What I hoped would happen is that it would go away. And I'd seen, or I didn't actually watch it, my mum said to me, and I was aged 11, I don't know if you remember, but there was a really influential BBC documentary, A Change in Sex, which had Julia Grant in it. Now my mum said to me, would you like to watch this? And I said no. Because I felt that if I watched it, I would be telling my mum how I really, really felt. And I didn't want to disclose that to my mum because I didn't want my mum to be disappointed. But I wanted to watch it. And I remember talking about it at school. And that was when I was at primary school. Then I went to secondary school. So these thoughts are still going around in my head. And I remember going to the library in the secondary school. I don't know whether you've ever then done this, but obviously as a child, you're really inquisitive about things. And I remember being warned about the big dictionary. The big dictionary was the dictionary with all the swear words in. So you were forbidden to look for the swear words. They would know somehow. We'd take fingerprints. We'd know if you looked at that word. I was going, okay. And so I remember flicking through and seeing the word transsexual. When I say flicking through, I actually went looking for that word. And I was aware of that word because of the documentary that had Julia in it. And that word existed in the dictionary. And somehow that word validated my existence and validated me because it existed in officialdom. And that was really, really important to me. And so, as the teenage years progressed, I remember telling my then girlfriend at the age of 16 how I really, really felt. And I actually felt really, really good about this, and she was really accepting. I knew that she would be accepted because she really liked Boy George. And that somehow made that difference to me because Boy George and the son was going nuts, and he said, let me know, we don't know whether Boy George is a boy, we don't know whether Boy George is a girl, the boy bit helps us, but, and it was then that you had gender bender blaring those different lines, and everybody was really confused, and obviously in certain places in the world, they were really, really confused, and parents were really angry because their son liked Boy George, and what does that then mean, and so on. But I sort of worked out, and this is what we do, isn't it, as human beings. We work out how we are going to be accepted, and we listen to people, we watch people all the time, and we look for our reference points. And then you go, yeah, you're going to be okay. So I knew that my granddad found it really, really difficult because my granddad, I remember watching Top of the Pops with granddad. There were two things that I found really difficult. One was watching Top of the Pops with granddad. The other one was watching the news with granddad as well. And this is the 1970s. So during the 1970s, David Bowie would be on TV, again blurring those gender lines, or Mark Bolan. And my granddad used to say, and to think his mum wanted a son. And so you would listen. And that's corrosive. So why are we seeing so many young people? So I had to make that decision. So I made that decision in 2015, which was incredibly difficult because it meant that my secret was then out. But as I got older, I realised that I no longer wanted to live in an inauthentic or unauthentic way. I actually wanted to be me. And the older I got, I realised that I had less time to live as me. So I had to then do something about it. So I had to let that secret out. And that was incredibly challenging. But up to that point, I'd used the internet. And this is what our young people are doing. They're using the internet to find out who they are. And there are loads of great things about the internet. And there are obviously many challenges that exist with the internet. But one of the places that they will then go to is the internet to then ask these questions. And then they will see other people. Because one of the difficult things that we find as human beings is we look for someone who is like us. And that is what the internet then provides. It makes you feel that you are not alone. So for years I've been researching, and one of the things that I would then say, am I really transgender? So during the 1930s, no, that was not in the 1930s, I've got a time machine back in time. So that was a real challenge for me, like in the 1930s.
Cover the internet.
Yeah, we covered, yeah, the internet. Where is the internet in the 1930s? But, so in my 30s, I was then thinking, like, maybe, just maybe, I will then grow out of this. And then I would do that research and go, well, yeah, I think those are my feelings. I'll wait. But I just never then did. And that is what I think is maybe happening with our young people. And they're a lot more confident now because there's greater visibility and there is greater understanding. That isn't just with the young people, that's also with parents as well, who want the best for their children. So what we then see is that, and again I find this really interesting, that you can see when you look at those statistics that most of the referrals are around the teenage years. So around the age of 14 and 15 and 16, that's when the bulk of the referrals go into the Tavistock clinic. Really interestingly though, it's predominantly children that are assigned female at birth. Now why is that? And those are some questions that we then have to ask ourselves is, why is that then happening? Also, that a number of the children are on the autistic spectrum as well. So that then, when we're working with young people, just adds another dimension to the complexities in supporting the young people. But over this 2-year period, approximately 3,400 referrals have then gone in, which is a significant amount of referrals. Right, the legal frameworks then. I'm sure that you all know the legal frameworks really well. Sorry, I'm just checking on the time. So the legal frameworks then. These are things that you then have to bear in mind. One, data protection. So making sure that that data is confidential. But also understanding that within that data, if you then look at section 10, there is data that can be processed which can affect people's well-being. And that is an offence. If you process data which affects the person's well-being, then that potentially is a criminal offence. So you need to then bear that in mind, and that then comes down to a person's name and other information that you may hold on to them. So you need to make sure that you know the Data Protection Act. You also need to make sure about the Human Rights Act as well. And the Human Rights Act is really, really interesting because it affords all of us protection. And that's absolutely key to exist in our society. And that protection may be from the right to life. It may be that we treat each other in a humane way. So torture is forbidden. So don't ever think that torture is physical. Torture can be mental as well. And in the Human Rights Act, we have this concept of dignity. But there are other aspects of the Human Rights Act that you then need to be aware of. So the right to privacy, the right to a family life, and then to exist without discrimination, but also that you have a right to education as well. So within the Human Rights Act, there are lots of key things then to be aware of. And then, in terms of transition and supporting trans people, there is the Gender Recognition Act. Now, the Gender Recognition Act was a significant piece of legislation which then affords protection for trans people. Now, I haven't even started the process of the receiving a gender recognition certificate yet. And the reason why is because I have to live as Claire for 2 years. I then have to build up documentation to show that I am living as Claire for 2 years. I then have to have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So you can then see that in order to get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, I have to then go to a gender identity clinic. But the waiting times, so far, we're nearly from when my GP then put in a referral, we're at a 2-year point now where my referral first went in. And I haven't even started the process yet because I haven't then been living as Claire and changing my documentation and having that diagnosis of gender dysphoria and everything else that then sits with that to build that up yet. But once I hit the 2-year mark, I can then apply for a gender recognition certificate. All this information will be collated, and then a group of people that I will never meet sit down and make a decision about me. And then they will give me a gender recognition certificate. But in there are various different procedures that you then have to then jump through. And some people have then said, well, actually, is that right? The length of time that this then takes and the distress that then creates. But also that once I get that gender recognition certificate, then you can't then talk about your previous gender. So in that sense, then you have this protection. But up until then you're in this grey area, which causes all types of difficulties. So there is the Gender Recognition Act, and then we've got the Equality Act as well, which I'm sure that you know inside out. Now the Equality Act, I think, is really important. And it's important because then we have these concepts that are in there, which is dignity, respect and equality. And for those people that really enjoy Ofsted inspections, they use the Equality Act and they use the Human Rights Act and then bring that together to then inform them with their decisions, along with their inspection frameworks and so on. But within the Equality Act, it then designates 9 protected characteristics, which I'm sure that you all then know about. One is gender reassignment. Now what then becomes really interesting about the gender reassignment is that you are protected if you then fulfil one of 6 categories. If you then propose to reassign your gender and you tell someone about it, even though nothing then happens, you are then protected by the Equality Act. You may then start with that social transition as well, and again you are protected. There may be physical, medical intervention as well, you are then protected. You may have a gender recognition certificate, and you are then protected. So you could, when you're working with young people, and they say, I intend to transition, I intend to reassign my gender, they are then covered under the Equality Act. And it's not this nice linear process. You can stop and say, right, that's it. I'm not then going to do anything about it at this moment in time, but you are still covered. And you might then go back to then further your transition in a year's time or 2 years' time. And that's something, again, for people then to be aware of. Also, that you have to then take into consideration that with everybody, their own transition is unique to them as well, which again throws up some challenges, doesn't it, when we're working with young people, and how do we accommodate and how do we meet their needs. But in there, as you will well know, is section 149, which is the public sector equality duty, which is really, really important. And what it then says is that as a public body, you have to be doing a variety of different things. You have to be fostering good relationships. So how do you go about doing that? How do you create awareness with protected characteristics so that we are creating this equal society where we are free from discrimination, we're free from harassment, we're free from victimisation? How do we go about then doing that? Because again, that's one other aspect of section 149. You have to eliminate those particular aspects. You have to advance opportunity. So, like for trans young people, how would you get them to participate in public life? Because again, this is something that you then have to consider. How do you eliminate disadvantage? How do you meet the needs? Because that, again, is part of the public sector equality duty. So bearing that in mind, where you've got this legal framework, you can also then look at Maslow. Now, Maslow's hierarchy of need, it does have some faults with it, but in a way it creates a framework. Now, I personally don't think that it is just this nice and you move up, you reach the top of the pyramid and you're like, wow, great, self-actualisation, I am there. Oh no, just a second, there's now transcendence, so now I am there. If you think about it, all of those different things that have to then be in operation then together to be making that difference. From the very basic one, which is the physiological needs, to making sure that we have shelter, to making sure that we have water, and we have then food, and we have our clothing. So what you then have to think about, well, what happens with the trans young person that has just been ejected from their home? where then do they live? Because then you're back down at the bottom. In terms of security and safety, how do we make sure that our safeguarding policies and our policies within our organisation are creating that safety, creating that security? Because that is absolutely key. Because again, when you look at the statistics for trans people, is that they are marginalised. Getting a job is really difficult. Because in there, you will know, there is subconscious bias taking place. I know, I've received it. I know that people may feel uncomfortable for various different reasons. And so far, I'm really pleased that you've not legged it out through the door. But that is the harsh reality of what then happens. That one of the things that has changed with me is my perception of the world significantly, which I'll then talk about in a moment. So belonging. How do we belong? What makes us feel like we belong as human beings? So you have your family, you have your friends, you have love, isn't it? We want to feel wanted, we want to feel needed, we want to feel loved, but we want to belong. And we belong in lots of different ways, in different communities. You can belong in a faith community. You can belong within your race. You can belong to a sports organisation. You can belong in your school. You can belong to a youth group. You can belong to a band. And we have this need. But when young people reach the teenage years, that belonging is really important with peers. And that acceptance that they are looking for is again really important. So then that affects our esteem. And I read a really interesting book by Dr. Tim O'Brien, who then says we don't have just one self-esteem. He then puts forward this idea, we have esteems or self-esteems, and it changes, it fluctuates. So on a Monday, because certain things are then happening, your self-esteem could be through the roof. You're feeling really good about yourself. On Tuesday, for whatever reason, it's a really bad day. So your self-esteem hits rock bottom. So again, those things that are beneath that, they're affecting that esteem. But in there is all about self-respect, isn't it? It's seeking the respect of others and respect of ourselves. And when all of that then comes together, you now move into this concept of actualisation. And you are happy to be you. And that really is about being authentic. So one of the key questions I want you to think about is, are you all authentic? Do you live authentically? When you look inside you, are you feeling that you are interacting with the world without a lens that's then skewing the focus just slightly? Because inside of you there is something that you know is stopping you from living authentically. But when you live authentically, the world then changes. So for me, coming out, that baggage, that weight that I carried for all my life went. It was other challenges presented itself, but I no longer had in the closet that big secret of mine. That as a teacher, and then as a deputy head teacher, and then as a head teacher, thinking, I'm not really being true with the young people that I'm then working with. And that always affected me. Because they almost got 95% of me, but there was that small bit, I never thought that was being really, really true. So then you have to then think about how we make people feel that we belong. So you can then see that if you do your research, there are some examples of where you see how people don't feel that they belong. So this is just a news story that then appeared, and this is a young person who basically then said, because of things that were about them going to the toilet and then being rejected from the toilet, then they stopped drinking water because they didn't want to go to the toilet. So if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, you've then just affected the whole physiological bit. A person has a right to be able to then drink water. And a person should feel safe going to the toilet. And if you're then stopping yourself from drinking water because then you are afraid what would then happen at the toilet, something is then going wrong. So when you then see people say, well, these gender-neutral toilets, and then what's then happening, you go, well, yeah, is it... We're just trying to be caring for all our children. Now, I know that when I was younger, going to this toilet, regardless of them saying I was trans, was a really scary thing when I was at secondary school. Why? Because you were told that when you go to secondary school, one of the first things that happen is someone's going to pick you up and put your head down the toilet. Everybody feels that, and so these toilets become really scary places. And they're scary because you see the older children, and they all look like dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus Rex, because you've got to remember what it's like to be an 11-year-old. You've got to remember what it's like to be a 7-year-old. You have to remember what you felt like, because when you do that, that informs you on how you then support young people. And again, this is another story where there was a young child and she was fired at by a BB gun, and there was bullying that was then taking place. And if you think about it in terms of belonging, I'm not sure how worse that can be for somebody to then fire a gun at you and make you feel that you don't belong. And then the school then said, well, okay, right, we brought in an organisation then to support like trans people. And so that for me was really distressing, but again, it just goes to show you that concept of belonging and how devastating that must have felt for that young child. To feel vulnerable, to feel that they weren't listened to have an organisation that then wasn't listening to this young person's needs. And again, this is what we then have to think about. So, how many trans people do you have that you work with? Now, I know that all the schools that I went to had a trans person. I know that for a fact, because that trans person was me. I just never, ever said, hi, yeah, can I just tell you that I'm trans? Imagine saying that in 1979. What would have then happened? So you don't know.
In the press.
Pardon?
You've probably been outed in the
Yeah,
press.
absolutely. So, but you don't know. That's it. It's not like you're wearing a big badge, and you can't make assumptions as well. You can't then say, well, that child over there, yeah, they look a bit trans. You can't do that, can you?
No.
You cannot make those assumptions, but you have to accept that they exist, because they will be watching, and they will be listening to what you are saying, and that will be informing them how the world is then seeing them, and what then happens next. So is that going to mean that they self-harm? Is that then going to mean that they have suicidal thoughts? So what do you do as practitioners then to challenge your own assumptions and to reduce that stigma, even though nobody's presented to you that you have a trans child? How do you create the environment where you're inclusive of everybody? So on your day-to-day practice. So what you then have to think about is your work as an individual. Sorry, I do apologise. Okay, I have 2 minutes. Right, so your work then as an individual. How do you go about being inclusive? And really, from a trans viewpoint, and also within that it's non-binary, because what we have is that we have people that, for myself, transitioning within a binary world, but we have some young people that are also questioning that and say, well, actually, I don't feel that I belong to any gender. So I feel that I am neither male nor female. And what you have to do, and this is the real challenge, you have to accept that the young person is the authority on their identity. And it's not for you to put your identity onto them. It's not for you to project your fears onto them either. Your role, and my role, is to then offer that support. And also accept that it may fluctuate as well. And not to show you disapproval. I said, well, last week you said, yeah, well, but does it matter? Because surely you want happy human beings. And in there you then say, right, are we then treating people with dignity? Are we treating people with respect? And yes, they're unsure about their identity. Because that's what happens to all of us, isn't it? That we think about our identities and we think about our value system, and sometimes certain things then happen and you go and you reevaluate who you are as a person. Our job as adults is to help in that supportive way, and to be understanding, to be caring, to be accepted. And what we're looking for is affirmation. I'm looking for affirmation for my identity. And I'm looking to be accepted. I don't want to be tolerated. I don't want you to put up with me. I want you to then see me not as a label, but just see me as Claire. I want you to see me as a really good human being that has loads of silly knowledge inside my head, but is also really knowledgeable about how you then work with young people. And also, trust me, and then see that I am authentic, and I am really, really caring. Because that's always how I've always prided myself as being. So, you then work as an individual. You then think about your microaggression. And a microaggression is behaving in these brief ways, which you then check your own behaviour. You check your language. You make sure that you're using that person's name. Their known name. Using my name as Claire, Claire for me represents a struggle. It represents 48 years of being, I don't even know whether it's in denial, of a struggle with my own identity. So existing as Claire represents that struggle. It represents everything that I've had to go through to be at this point now. And I can assure you, I never ever thought that I would be here at this moment in time doing this. I can categorically state that, okay, that I never thought it would be possible. But somehow, I picked up the courage to then just go, that's who I really am. And then I stepped back and went, I just said that out loud. Other people now know my innermost secret, the thing that I then, held inside me. So when you use my name, and when you use a person and they say, look, this is how I want to be referred to, then that's what you're doing. You're validating them. You're making them feel good about themselves. So you need to be really aware of that microaggression. And not then saying, well, you're not real. What do we mean by not real? Earlier this year, there was a newsreader that then said, for trans people, be proud of being trans. I thought, yeah, I'm proud of being trans. But don't say you're a real woman. And so you go, right, okay. I'm trying to understand that viewpoint. And in some ways I can understand that, that her experiences are different to my experiences. So I'm seeing that. But now you've said I'm not really something. So if I'm not a real woman, I'm not a real man either. So what really am I? And when we then start saying people are not real people, where does that then lead us? Because that's how we discriminate against people, isn't it? And that's how we victimise people. And that's where we create intolerance. So these are some things that we have to then think about. You have to think about those words and bullying. It's really lonely being trans. I've had friends for years, and you say this out loud, and all of a sudden, there's unease. And then that's it. The friendship isn't there anymore. Why? Not changed. Changed my appearance. In fact, surely is it better now because this is me? Why can you not be friends with me? So there is then the bullying, there is the isolation. And where you get isolation, there is a correlation between isolation and depression. Because again, it comes down to that concept of belonging. So then you have to think about your organisation and some of the things that you can then do. I'll give you a really quick whistle-stop tour about that. That is me just outside Trafalgar Square. I don't know if you've been around Trafalgar Square, but it's a really nice place, really busy. I just went, look at the crossing points. So there were same-sex crossing points. Men holding hands with a little green symbol. I went, oh. And then there were female. And then there were heterosexual couples. And then I didn't actually see a bisexual one, which were 3 people. So I didn't see that one. Maybe there's just not enough space. But I saw the transgender symbol. Now that for me was really important. Why was it important? Because it exists out in the real world. Because it's a crossing point. It's a point of safety. It means that someone cares about me crossing the road. But also it's society, isn't it, saying you exist. Because I'm willing to spend money on this and invest in this, I am affirming your identity. So I thought, I'm going to stand under that. So that's what I then did. And then here on the train station, so I saw this symbol. And it was brilliant, it's the Pride symbol. I think the Pride colours are just phenomenal. They just make you feel happy. You just look and go, I feel happy. But what again it's doing is it's that symbolic action. So as an organisation, you don't have to then go over the top. Young trans people don't, and LGBT young people don't necessarily want you to then be highlighting them. And you're then say, right, we've got some LGBT young people here. Right, we're doing loads to look after them, make sure stand back people please. Stand back, coming through. They don't want to be then seen as being different. What they want is just to be treated like everybody else. We have to accept they may need additional support. But it's about working with them and finding out what their needs are and having those conversations and making sure that you have those policies, making sure, because they will reference this, they will walk down corridors and they will then look and they'll say, that poster. But what they don't like is this. They don't like seeing the poster, but you don't do anything about it. So your actions are, yeah, we've put this up, because in their head they will be really cynical. They go, you did that for Ofsted, didn't you? And so that then undermines what you're trying to achieve. They will listen to your language. They will watch your body language. They will see whether you are caring, whether you are accepting or not. So one of the things that you might then do is with your lanyard, is you wear the pride thing, or then you have the transgender or the non-binary flag, those colours, and you just have them just around. And how you then interact, and you are proud to interact with them as well, and you validate their identity, and you boost that esteem, but you make them feel that they belong, and that's what you do as an organisation. They will look at your websites, they will look at your policies, they will do things at 3 o'clock in the morning where they're trying to work out who they are as people. Does my organisation, does my school really care about me? And that is where you then show them that you then do. And you don't have to highlight it, but they will be watching. So finally, a quote. And that's me, my soulmakers. Thank you. Thank you very much. You can, if you wish, you can follow me on Twitter, so it's C Birkenshaw. If you do have questions or you want to get in contact with me and you are unsure, then I will offer as much support as obviously that I can. But I can bring lots of different things together. One, it's authentic, obviously transition, but I have worked in schools at various different levels for 26 years. So I do know young people well, right? The message now is to go downstairs. Okay? Right, thank you very much. Thank you for your time.